And so maybe we'll go ahead and get started as folks join us. And great to see Jamie, Erica joining us. Oh, Karen Johnson's joining us, but you're saying hello, Karen. There you are. So why don't we go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to Resilient Leadership. This is Managing Through Crisis, part 3 of 3. And we're going to be focusing on 2 aspects of resilient leadership: communication and also flexibility, being directive, but also being flexible at the same time. I'm very excited to have with us today Karen Johnson, my friend and colleague, who is at the cutting edge of helping reinvigorate our healthcare systems across the country in implementing trauma-informed care. And she brings just an incredible wealth of knowledge and wisdom. And Karen, thank you so much for joining us. Karen is the principal of Trauma-Informed Lens Consulting. Her website is on the slide deck here. And you can check out the work that she's doing. But she's gonna, she and I were talking in the last week, and I was talking to her a little bit about these webinars, and it's so in line with the work that, Karen, that you do with trauma-informed care work. And so Karen's gonna kind of co-facilitate this with me and bring some of her knowledge and expertise into this. So for us to get started, and this is a review for some of you who are here for part 1 and part 2, but when we talk about resiliency, for us, the way that we talk about it as leaders, this means that you're not necessarily building in a new skill set. You know, when we talk about resiliency, it's the ability to maybe bounce back, or adaptation to stress, or being able to move forward or thrive under adverse conditions. Those are skill sets that you as leaders have already. The idea of resiliency is that we lose those skill sets when we need them the most. When we're under that kind of pressure, what happens to our ability to act in our higher self or our resilient leadership from our resilient leadership skill set? So for us, I love the Latin of resilience, which is actually to lead back to. And so the idea for us for resilience is, how do we get back to the leader that we already are when we lose our way? So thinking of becoming and learning a skilled way of being, despite disruption, imbalance, newness, change, stressors. I mean, this is all what is going on for all of us right now in the most intense way. And so how do we support our own resiliency? How do we access our own resiliency in the face of this adversity? So the qualities of a resilient leader. A resilient leader looks at problems, challenges, obstructions as opportunities. And I can't think of a better example of what's happened in the last 2 weeks with so many of the health centers that I work with, where you all have transformed your care delivery in a matter of days to telehealth services. It's an example of resiliency, where we've just met a problem and seen the opportunities and changed. Also, a quality of a resilient leader is aware of the victim mentality trap, also aware of blaming. And a lot of times when we hear and use language like they, we're in that modality. When we use inclusive language like we are in our resilient leadership. So it's attitude, it's character, it's the makeup, it's really having that strengths-based approach, trust in our staff, trust in our teams, versus deficit can't-based approach. Resilient leaders also find their power. They find the power that they already have when they forget that they have it. And Karen's gonna help us talk about what happens to make us forget that we have our power. And resilient leaders also overcome difficulties versus getting stuck in the trap of always having to have the perfect or the absolute right answer. Resilient leaders know there's a lot of gray in the direction that we have to provide. And we find ways to provide it anyway. And resilient leaders learn from mistakes. They are in a constant state of learning, teaching environment. They model that for their teams. They model it within themselves, and they demonstrate themselves as a leader, but also learner, and are able to do that together. So we're gonna dive in and talk a little bit about how we can maintain some of these things. The things that we talk about today are available on the NSI Strategies website. You can download all 6 steps of managing crisis through resilient leadership. We're focusing on the last 2, step 5 and 6, and also the resources of awareness, which are the keys to becoming and accessing your resilient leader. So, Karen, I'll invite you to come in and help us a little bit with this piece. This is a slide that we used in the last couple of webinars as well to talk about the waters that we are in. Right now, we are hearing a lot of dysregulating, disruptive facts, terminology, things. We're hearing, especially around COVID-19, that we are facing and fighting an invisible enemy. We're talking about it as if it's a war and we're being attacked. We're also being dysregulated because we're not getting an answer of how long do I have to manage through this? There's an unknown duration. We don't have an answer to this. We also don't know specifically where this is going to impact us. It's a widespread impact is what we're hearing. And we're hearing terminology like being in unprecedented waters, in uncharted territory, where there is no path, there is no way, that we are in effect having to find our way as we walk it. So I was wondering, Karen, one of the things that we talked about is the impact that the last 14, 21 days has had on us. And I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit as leaders about how that's impacting us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nick. It's wonderful to be with you today, and thank you for those that have joined, and thank you for all the work you're doing as Nick has noted, and the amazing resilience that you're exhibiting as you are navigating these new waters. The interesting thing about this current situation is it highlights the ubiquitous nature of both the challenges and the resilience. We all have, everyone on this webinar and everyone you're serving, people you're serving next to in your families, etc., all have a list of really valid concerns. Perhaps concerns about your job, about how you take care of your kids while you're working remotely, about whether anyone who's at risk in your family might get sick, about relatives that are working in the healthcare field or working in the grocery stores, how they might get sick. Very valid concerns. And so it's interesting that this has become, in many ways, a universal experience, and thus it gives us lots of opportunity for learning how to respond and share the messages of resilience and both stress and distress in a universal way. When we're done with this, there will be countless examples of how we navigated these waters, how we responded in a resilient way, how we were leaders, perhaps how we fell short also. But there's so much that we can learn. So Nick, thanks. I'll go on to this.
Yeah, great.
Right. There's stress and distress, that's what we're experiencing right now. And many of you know a lot about this, know about how stress impacts our bodies and our brains. In general, we don't need to be afraid of stress. It's actually important for us. Stress that is moderate, mild, short-lived, and controllable can be positive and leads to resilience. It's all these things that are noted on the left side of this slide. It's when we get to this state we're in right now, where this distress is intense, prolonged, and repeated, and when it feels uncontrollable, that's when we are in a situation in which we need to understand more about how we're being impacted by stress, because our stress response system is continually being activated. It's interesting. what we know is when we're in this area of distress, which is all noted on the right side of the slide, we, again, down to the fourth bullet point, we're, often moody, worried, scared, etc. We may feel we're out of control. It's absolutely draining. It's exhausting. You may find that you're tired when you wake up in the morning. That's how I feel. Even if I had a decent night's sleep, quote unquote decent night's sleep, we're doing a lot of work in our dreams too, around this. So things that were easy perhaps are now harder. It's harder to focus. It's harder to concentrate, and it's really harder to do this complex work that you are being expected to do every day as you try to be the resilient leader that we know you are. So I guess one of the keys to it is to expect this, to expect that you're going to be impacted by the stress and distress in your lives, and figure, and sort out how you can respond. So wanted to talk a little bit about the brain and about the neuroscience of all of this. Dr. Bruce Perry, who's noted at the top of this slide, is very vocal right now. If you've not been introduced to his work, it's at the top of the slide, the Neurosequential Network, and then that's the link that can take you to his website, where he is uploading 15-minute discussions, hour discussions about the various pieces of his model. He teaches us, many of you are aware of him, but he teaches us a lot about the basic neuroscience of stress, how we're being impacted in the moment, and what we can do about it. And the more I listened to him, I was privileged to be trained in his model at my previous organization in Milwaukee. And now as I revisit this and go back to his work, I am finding it incredibly relevant for all of us, everybody, every human being in this moment. So just talking a little bit about this slide, we know that the brain mediates our thoughts, feelings, emotions, actions, and connections to others in the world. Understanding the core principles of neuroscience can help us better understand ourselves and others right now, and how we can build wellness and resilience. So there's a hierarchy to how our brain develops and functions. Here we've got the cortex reference and the limbic system reference. Those are very relevant. And below the limbic system, we have the brain stem, which comes online first in life, but that's where the stress response system is housed. And the stress response system is where all the information we receive all day long from the outside world and our internal mechanisms, that's where all the information goes through and helps us decide if we're threatened or we're safe. So if something that comes through the stress response system in the lower brain causes to feel threatened, there will be a variety of responses. And we often reference the basic range of those responses as fight, flight, or freeze. So when looking at this slide, we've got the frontal cortex or the cerebral cortex, where we do a lot of our abstract thinking, problem solving, language coordination, and the limbic system below that, that's our emotional responses, motivation and instinct, memory formation, reflexive movement, et cetera. And below that, again, we have the brainstem, where the lower part of the brain, where the stress response system is housed. When the information that's coming through our lower brain is causing us to be afraid, to feel unsafe, to be in that place that Nick noted when we're navigating these difficult waters, what happens is our frontal cortex or cerebral cortex is not online. We are in a state of alarm, fear, or even terror sometimes. If we're thinking about a family member who might be sick, that can really cause you to only live in the moment, to not be able to problem solve. The whole thinking brain goes offline. So understanding these basic brain functions is really important, because once we understand it, we can figure out how to respond. Epinephrine and cortisol are two stress hormones that impact our brain also, and our whole body. Go ahead.
I just love this explanation, because it just really helps me understand that really is not my fault. And that's why we write that at the top of this slide, that this is my biology working almost against me. And I think too, during these times, sometimes that internal dialogue that we all have can get very loud and very strong. And we can get negative with ourselves around, Sarah's sharing that it's hard to focus and complete regular tasks right now.
Yeah.
And the judgment that I can bring to myself right now and beat myself up about not being able to function at my, quote, normal level really can exacerbate all this too, right? We get tangled up in all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, very, very true. And one quote I've heard from Dr. Perry is we are operating at the most at 75% productivity right now, and much of the day, much less than that. So to understand that and to actually apply that knowledge to all of our systems. So just for example, in our schools, kids are having a hard time doing the academics when they're at home and they're struggling to feel safe. And so all of our systems need to be focused on safety and helping us regulate so we can stay out of our lower brain and spend more time in our thinking brain.
Awesome. So Karen, let's go ahead and it's funny. This has been everyone's favorite part of the webinars. And the slide decks, not all the wisdom and teaching and learnings, but it's actually the practice. And so we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about how to manage some of the things that are going on in our brain that Karen just kind of outlined and detailed for us. And there's a couple of things that we can do that we know are very effective. And Karen's going to talk a little bit more about this later in her bottom-up, top-down approach to this. But using techniques in mindfulness to help ground us in the here and now are so helpful. And so we can do this with ourselves, with our clients, with our staff in a number of different ways. And one of the things that we can do is just become color aware of, as maybe taking a step back, us maybe for the first time all day today, slowing things down a little bit to just gaze into this PowerPoint slide and allow those colors to become conscious to you, to break through into your awareness, the amazing different colors of seemingly one color, green, yet all the different variations and shades that we see in this PowerPoint. And also to becoming mindful and aware of specific objects or things like the leaves in this picture and all the different shapes and sizes and textures and colors of those leaves help us again start to break out of the perseveration of the past, the perseveration of the future thoughts, and brings our thoughts into alignment into the here and now of connecting our mind, thinking mind with our senses and what we're seeing, what we're experiencing. And you can do this in a room by looking at the corner of a room or becoming aware of specific objects in your room, which is a grounding experience for all of us. And then, one of the techniques that we've used in the last 2 webinars, and people seem to really enjoy it, is this great intervention, and it takes about 30-45 seconds to do, and it's completely free. And it's focusing on your breath, diaphragmatic breathing. And what helps with diaphragmatic breathing is somewhat of a threefold experience. We know that our breath is connected with our emotions. And the research tells us that if we can take 3 deep breaths during an emotional state, for most people, that emotional state does decrease in its intensity. The other thing that it does is it helps, again, take a unconscious process, breathing, and all of a sudden make it conscious, aware, which puts us in a mindful state. In fact, if you allow yourself to slow down a little bit right now and just focus on your breath, it actually becomes a little awkward, because now I've taken an unconscious process and I've made it conscious. And I find myself a little out of breath. And then the third thing it does is it helps stop those thoughts, that thinking, which is potentially generating negative emotional energy. By focusing my thoughts on my body and in my breathing, it helps direct me to a mindful state. So we're gonna together join in this exercise of deep breathing. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but you're welcome to join us. And I automatically like to close my eyes when I breathe, but you don't have to. You can focus wherever it is that's comfortable for you. And I'm going to invite everyone to just, again, focus on your breath and become aware that you've just taken an unconscious process, breathing, and you've made it aware, you've made it conscious. And together, we're going to focus on the in-breath, and we're going to accentuate that in-breath a little bit and try and draw an in-breath in for 3 to 4 seconds, and then let go of that out-breath for 3 to 4 seconds. And we're going to do this in a way that's mindful, where our attention, our awareness is on our breath. And the mind, it's kind of like a rock star who wants attention, or a jealous child. It's going to try and pull us away by thinking about all different things. And that's perfectly okay. The mind is busy at work doing that. And know that you can just simply return back to your mindful state. And your pathway to do that is by focusing back on your breath. So together, I'm going to invite you to take an in-breath in, 2, 3, 4, and then let go. 2, 3, 4. And again, in-breath in, 3, 4, and then letting go of that out-breath. 3, 4, and then one more in, 2, 3, 4, and then out breath out, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to do one more in silence. And then slowly allow yourself to come back to awareness in the room, maybe opening your eyes, wiggling your fingers a little bit, or your toes, feeling them grounded on the floor or wherever they might be as we come back into awareness of the webinar. And so just by doing that exercise, I know it's amazing. I feel so much more calm, and I feel much more slower actually than when we started the exercise. And so with that exercise, we're going to go ahead and jump into how we talked about this on the last 2 webinars, Karen, but we only have about 5 minutes left. Folks can go download this from the NSI Strategies webpage, and it's really focusing on what we can do in using these tools to gain awareness. That key to focusing on, what am I telling myself in my mind? What am I experiencing in my body? And what are the actions that I am doing that are helping me become aware of what's going on for me? It's really the wisdom of the body telling me where I'm at. So for us today, our last 2 pieces are 5 and 6, of over-communicate and be flexibly directive. So when we talk about resilient leaders, we know as a resilient leader, our staffs are offline, right? Their learning is not where it would be if we weren't under this kind of stress. And we know in normal times from our friends in advertising, to communicate a message and to get it stick, you need to communicate that message 8 times, and you need to do that 8 different ways. That's a lot. And that's under normal circumstances. Right now in crisis, our teams are dysregulated. Their learning brains are offline. So as resilient leaders, we over communicate, but we don't get frustrated about it. We don't get frustrated when our directives are not followed. We look at those times as an opportunity to remodel, remessage, and reteach. These are learning opportunities to reinforce our message and unify our team to flow in the direction that we've plotted for them, and providing that over and over again. And so in that, we don't look at that lack as a deficit. We look at it as an opportunity for us to over communicate to support our teams. And then number 6, and all the steps kind of work up to this one, of being directive as a leader, but flexibly directive. Our teams need direction. They don't necessarily need to know exactly how to get there. Resilient leaders own making the call of where to go. They may not always need to tell their teams how to get there. A lot of times as leaders, especially right now, we don't have enough information to make the right call. We just have to do the best we can with the information that we have, because our teams need direction, and they need direction, which is structure. And structure helps to regulate our teams. Our staff, we have to trust them. They're adaptable, they're creative, they're smart. That's why you've put them on your teams. Let them figure out how to get there. You don't have to provide all the steps, but you do have to provide the place that they need to figure out where to go. And always remember, resilient leaders can change course. Just because you've set a course with the best information you had at that time, it may change. You can modify your direction. That's when we start to bring our flexibility in, that we don't rigidly stick to our decisions. We know that we can flex in and out of that as long as we communicate that philosophy and those changes to our teams. And finally, resilient leaders do not put the burden of the decision or to make the call by the employee. I've heard so much, especially in the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, of organizations telling employees, well, you can work from home if you want, but you can also come into the office if you want, before those decisions were made for us. That's not fair. Resilient leaders don't do that. Resilient leaders make the call. They make the decision and then support their teams to follow through with that. If we don't provide that flexible direction, we make that dysregulation, we exacerbate that dysregulation, which continues to keep that prefrontal cortex offline. So I thought we'd kind of end here, Karen. We talked about what enhances resiliency, and I was hoping maybe just in a minute or so that you could talk about the top-down, bottom-up approach.
Yes, Nick, thank you. We regulate in 3 different ways. Dr. Perry would tell us, using with top down is using our frontal cortex. Those are the things, the mantras that we say. We remind ourselves of things like, it's a small number of people will get really sick, even smaller number of people who will not survive this. So, we're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Those are the mantras we use top down when we're using our frontal cortex. The challenge with some of that is our frontal cortex isn't always online, and so we can't bank on that. So another way to regulate is from the bottom up, using somatosensory, rhythmic, repetitive interventions. And so walking, listening to music, doing art, rhythmic and repetitive activities, bouncing a ball, jumping on a trampoline. And the important piece here in this moment is to remember, we have to do those all day long. It's possible before this new normal for us that one exercise session in the morning perhaps would help us feel good all day long. Now, you may exercise for a half hour, 45 minutes, and only feel good for an hour or two. And 2 hours past that, you're not feeling well again. So that means you get up and you regulate again. So this piece about regulation, especially from the bottom up, especially working on our lower brain, quieting our lower brain through all those types of interventions, is just top list priority right now. Third way we regulate is in context with other people. We know that's difficult, but the message there is to stay emotionally connected the best way that we can through all the technology that's available to us. And that's happening everywhere. So many examples of how we're being resilient through our technology and through other creative ways of social distancing. So that's what I would note. And the piece about resilient leaders, whoever we are, whether we're a leader on the org chart or not, is about staying regulated so that we can assist others. Because if you're dysregulated, you won't be able to help another dysregulated individual. If you're dysregulated, they will remain dysregulated. So the only way to impact another person's sense of anxiety and help them be calm and be productive, etc., including your staff, is to stay regulated as adults.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. I know we're running out of time. I just want to make mention, if folks are interested in getting more support about resilient leadership, we do offer resilient leadership coaching. You can check that out on the NSI Strategies website. We offer a lot of support in a lot of different areas to you and your teams. Thank you for joining us for the 3-part series. These will all be on the website. Your teams can access these. We also want to invite folks to follow up with Karen and I for the WHOI afterwards, where we can talk in more detail and maybe get some shared learning together. So I just want to thank all of you again for the incredible work that you are doing out there on the front lines. You all are putting yourself at great risk to support your communities, while still also caring for yourselves and your families. And we know how challenging that is right now for you. And so these webinars are our attempt as a team to come together to do our best to help support yours. So thank you for the work that you do, and hope to see you at the WHOI. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.